The funniest thing about the entire situation wasn't that my father screamed at me for buying a house. It wasn't that he genuinely believed he had a right to approve the purchase. It wasn't even the fact that he called me selfish after spending most of my life treating me like the family ATM. No. The funniest part was that he honestly expected me to apologize. Instead, I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. And that laugh would eventually start a chain reaction that destroyed the illusion my family had been living under for decades. My name is Ethan. I'm 31 years old. 3 years ago, I bought my first house. Not a mansion, not some luxury property, just a comfortable 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood. The kind of place I'd dreamed about since I was a kid. I paid for every cent myself. No family money, no inheritance, no help, no co-signers. Just years of working 80-hour weeks, skipping vacations, driving old cars, and saving every spare dollar I could. When I got the keys, I sat alone in the empty living room for nearly an hour. I remember staring at the walls and thinking, I actually did it. For the first time in my life, I owned something nobody could take away. Or so I thought. A few days later, my phone rang. Dad, the moment I answered, he didn't even say hello. Ethan, what the hell is wrong with you? I blinked. What? The house? What about it? Why didn't you discuss it with the family first? I genuinely thought he was joking. I laughed, big mistake. His voice immediately grew colder. I'm serious. That made me laugh even harder. Dad, I bought a house, not a family pet. That's not the point. Then what's the point? The point is that major decisions affect everyone. I looked around my empty kitchen. Everyone, I lived alone, paid my own bills, hadn't lived with my parents for nearly 10 years. What exactly does my mortgage affect? His answer stunned me. It changes family plans. I sat there silently. Family plans. What family plans? Dad hesitated. Then he said something that explained everything. We assumed you'd eventually move back. I nearly choked. Move back into their house at 31 after spending a decade building my own life. Apparently my parents had created an entire future for me without ever consulting me. And in their fantasy, I was supposed to become their retirement plan. I was supposed to live nearby, help financially, run errands, handle emergencies, pay bills whenever they got into trouble. Basically, continue doing exactly what I'd been doing since I turned 18. Because here's the thing. I wasn't just the oldest child. I was the responsible child. My younger brother Ryan had always been the favorite. Ryan got support. Ryan got second chances. Ryan got forgiven. I got responsibilities. When Ryan crashed a car at 19, Dad paid for it. When Ryan dropped out of college, Dad paid for it. When Ryan started a business that failed within 6 months, Dad paid for it. Meanwhile, I worked nights while attending school, paid my own tuition, paid my own rent, bought my own car, built my own career, and somehow I was still the selfish one. The call continued for nearly 30 minutes. Dad complained, lectured, criticized, and finally said the sentence that changed everything. You should have asked for permission. Permission. I stared at my phone, then I started laughing again, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. I was 31 years old, I owned the house, I paid the mortgage. And somehow this man believed he still had authority over my life. Eventually I said, Dad, whose money bought the house? Silence. Mine. More silence. So why would I need permission? His answer came instantly. Because we're family. The moment he said that, I realized something. This wasn't about family. This was about control, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't giving it to him. Unfortunately, my father wasn't ready to accept that reality. And over the next few weeks, my family would show me exactly how entitled they really were. A week after the phone call, I thought the drama had died down. I was wrong. Very wrong. The first sign came on a Saturday morning. I was assembling furniture in my living room when my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Mom, we're stopping by around noon. Not, can we visit? Not, are you free? Not even. Would you mind if we came over? Just a declaration, like she was announcing the weather. I stared at the message and replied. Me? No, you're not. I have plans today. Those plans happened to involve eating pizza alone while watching movies and pretending I wasn't exhausted from moving. But they were still plans. A few minutes later, my phone rang. Mom, why can't we come? Because I don't want visitors today. There was a pause, then came the familiar guilt-trip tone. But we're family. I could practically hear the pout through the phone. Mom, family still asks before showing up. We just want to see the house. You'll see it eventually. Her voice sharpened. You've become very secretive. Apparently privacy was now secrecy. I ended the call before the argument could continue, or at least I tried to, because 30 minutes later my doorbell rang. I opened the door. There stood Mom, Dad and Ryan all smiling, all acting like nothing had happened. I stared at them. They stared back. Finally, I asked, "Did you seriously drive here after I said no?" Dad shrugged. "We were already on the way," which was complete nonsense because they lived 45 minutes away. Mom tried to step inside. I blocked the doorway. The smile disappeared from her face. "Ethan, no. What do you mean no?" "I mean no." Ryan laughed, actually laughed. "Dude, stop being dramatic." I looked at him. This was the same man who still borrowed money from our parents every few months. The same man who was 28 years old and somehow managed to have less financial stability than a teenager. And he was calling me dramatic. "I said no visitors." Dad's face darkened. "We're your parents, and this is my house." For a moment nobody spoke. Then Ryan rolled his eyes. Unbelievable, they left, but not before Dad muttered something under his breath. Something that stuck with me. "This attitude won't help you when you need family." At the time, I ignored it. I shouldn't have, because that wasn't a warning, it was a threat. 3 days later, my aunt called, then my grandmother, then 2 cousins. Then another aunt. The conversations all sounded strangely similar. Apparently my family had been discussing me. A lot. According to them, I was arrogant, ungrateful, selfish, disrespectful, cold-hearted. All because I bought a house and didn't immediately hand everyone a key. Then Grandma accidentally revealed the truth. "You know your parents were counting on that house." I froze. "What does that mean?" Silence. The kind of silence people make when they realize they've said too much. "Grandma," she sighed. Then everything came out. Apparently my parents had already made plans, detailed plans, without ever telling me, without ever asking me, without ever considering whether I wanted any part of it. Dad intended to retire within a few years. They planned to sell their home, move into my house temporarily, help me manage the property, and eventually live with me permanently. Permanent. I nearly dropped my phone. The house I had worked years to afford. The house I bought specifically because I wanted independence. The house that represented freedom. In their minds, it was basically a future family residence. A backup retirement strategy, a safety net. For them, not me. Suddenly everything made sense. The anger, the entitlement, the obsession with being consulted, the accusations. They weren't upset because I bought a house. They were upset because I bought the wrong house. I hadn't purchased a house that served their plans. I'd purchased one that served mine. That realization hit harder than I expected, because it revealed something painful. My parents never viewed my success as mine. They viewed it as a family asset, something available for redistribution whenever they needed it. And if that wasn't bad enough, Ryan made things even worse. A few days later he called. For once he sounded friendly, too friendly. "Ethan, got a quick question." I immediately knew I wasn't going to like it. "What? How many bedrooms does your place have again?" 3. "Nice." A pause. "Then, so if I ever needed a place to stay." I closed my eyes. There it was, the real reason he was calling. Not congratulations, not support, not brotherly affection. Opportunity. He saw a house. They saw a resource. And none of them seemed capable of understanding one simple fact. The house belonged to me. Not the family, not my parents, not Ryan, me. Unfortunately, they were about to learn that lesson the hard way. Because Ryan wasn't asking hypothetical questions. He already had a disaster brewing, and soon everyone would expect me to save him from it. Again. If there's one thing my family excelled at, it was turning Ryan's mistakes into everyone else's responsibility. Mostly mine. Growing up, it happened constantly. Ryan forgot to do his homework. Mom helped him. Ryan got suspended. Dad blamed the school. Ryan maxed out a credit card. Somehow the bank was predatory. Ryan wrecked a car. The road conditions were responsible. Nothing was ever Ryan's fault. And because nothing was ever his fault, he never learned anything. At 28 years old, he still operated under the assumption that somebody would always save him. Usually our parents. And when they couldn't, me. The call came on a Thursday evening. I had just gotten home from work when my phone started vibrating. Dad, then Mom, then Ryan, then Dad again. 5 missed calls in less than 10 minutes. I already knew something had happened. The only question was how expensive it was. I answered Ryan first. "What's going on?" For several seconds he didn't speak, then he sighed dramatically. "I got evicted." I closed my eyes. Of course he did. "What happened?" "My landlord is being unreasonable." That answer alone told me everything. Because whenever Ryan described someone as unreasonable, it usually meant they expected him to behave like an adult. "What actually happened?" More silence. Then he admitted it. He hadn't paid rent for 3 months. 3 entire months. I nearly laughed. "Why?" "I was struggling financially." "Ryan, you bought a motorcycle last month." "That's different." Different. Apparently rent was optional now. I rubbed my forehead. What exactly are you expecting me to do? Another pause, then came the answer. Mom and Dad said I could stay with you. I sat up. What? They already talked about it. No, they talked about it among themselves, without me. Which apparently wasn't the same thing. I never agreed to that. Come on, man. No, the word came out instantly, firm, simple, final. Ryan sounded genuinely confused, as if rejection had never crossed his mind. What do you mean, no? I mean you're not moving in. Just temporarily. No, until I get back on my feet. No, every answer was exactly the same, because I already knew how that story ended. Temporary would become 6 months. Then a year. Then indefinitely. I'd be paying more utilities, buying more groceries, cleaning up more messes, and somehow I'd eventually become the villain for wanting my own house back. I wasn't interested. A few minutes later, Dad called. The second I answered, he exploded. You can't leave your brother homeless. I laughed, actually laughed, because it was such a ridiculous statement. He's not homeless. He will be. He has 2 parents. Silence. Then that's different. No, Dad, it's really not. His voice grew colder. We don't have the space. That was a lie. Their house was bigger than mine, much bigger. They had multiple unused rooms. Everybody knew it, including him. The truth was simpler. They didn't want Ryan living with them because then they'd have to deal with him. Instead, they wanted me to deal with him. Again. You have 3 bedrooms. I know. So why can't your brother use one? Because I don't want a roommate. He's family. There it was, the magic word, the family card, the universal excuse for ignoring boundaries. The justification for every unreasonable demand. The emotional weapon my parents had used for decades, only this time it didn't work. Dad, family isn't a free pass. You're being selfish. I couldn't help smiling. There was that word again. Selfish. Their favorite accusation whenever I refused to sacrifice something for them. I bought my own house. Selfish. I wanted privacy. Selfish. I didn't want a freeloading brother moving in. Selfish. Funny how the people demanding things never seemed selfish themselves. The argument lasted nearly an hour. Mom joined. Then Ryan joined. Suddenly it became a 3-on-1 intervention, a coordinated pressure campaign. And the more they pushed, the clearer everything became. Not one person asked what I wanted. Not one person considered my feelings. Not one person cared about my plans. Their only concern was solving Ryan's problem. Using my resources. Eventually I reached my limit. I waited until everyone finished talking. Then I asked a simple question. How much money has Ryan borrowed from you over the years? Nobody answered. I continued. How much money has he borrowed from me? Still silence. How many chances has he gotten? Nothing. Then I delivered the sentence that changed the conversation. I'm done paying for Ryan's adulthood. Dead silence. The kind that only happens when somebody says something everyone knows is true but nobody wants acknowledged. Dad recovered first. That's not what this is about. That's exactly what it's about. Then I hung up. For the first time in my life. I hung up on all of them and the reaction was immediate. The next morning my phone looked like a battlefield. Texts, voicemails, messages from relatives, accusations, lectures, guilt trips. Apparently the entire family had been informed that I was abandoning my brother. What nobody mentioned was that Ryan's emergency was entirely self-created, or that my parents had spent years enabling him, or that they had plenty of room for him themselves. No, according to the family narrative, I was the villain, and they were about to escalate things even further. Because a week later I came home from work and discovered something that made my blood run cold. Someone had been inside my house. The first thing I noticed was the box. A large cardboard box sitting in the middle of my living room. The problem? It definitely hadn't been there when I left for work. I froze. For a second I wondered if I'd somehow forgotten it. Maybe moving stress had finally broken my brain. Then I noticed something else. A pair of shoes near the hallway, not mine. My stomach dropped. Every instinct immediately went on high alert. I quietly set my work bag down and looked around the house. Nothing appeared damaged. No broken windows, no forced entry, no signs of a burglary, which somehow felt worse, because it meant whoever entered probably had a key. Then I saw the label on the box, RYAN written in thick black marker. I stared at it. Then stared some more. Surely not. Surely nobody could be that insane. Then I heard movement upstairs. Footsteps. My heartbeat immediately spiked. I grabbed the nearest heavy object I could find, a lamp, and started moving toward the staircase. Halfway up I heard a familiar voice. Ryan humming like he belonged there. I rounded the corner and nearly dropped the lamp. Ryan was standing in my guest bedroom, unpacking clothes, actually unpacking, like he was moving in. For several seconds, my brain simply refused to process what I was seeing. Finally, I managed. "What the hell are you doing?" Ryan jumped, then turned around. Instead of looking embarrassed, he looked annoyed like I had interrupted him. "Oh, you're home early," I blinked. "What are you doing in my house?" He shrugged. "Moving in." The casualness nearly broke me. "What? Mom said you needed time to calm down." I just stared, because surely I wasn't hearing this correctly. "You broke into my house?" "I didn't break in." He held up a key. My key. My blood instantly went cold. "Where did you get that?" "Dad had it." For a moment, everything stopped. Every conversation, every argument, every weird comment, every entitled demand. Suddenly, it all clicked. Years earlier, when I was renting an apartment, I'd given my parents an emergency key for actual emergencies, not surprise visits, not uninvited inspections, and certainly not unauthorized move-ins. Apparently, when I bought my house, Dad had taken the spare key I'd given him years ago and quietly made copies before returning it. Copies. Without asking, without permission, without telling me. I felt something inside me snap. Not explosive anger, something colder, something sharper. The realization that these people genuinely believed my boundaries didn't matter, that my property wasn't really mine, that my decisions were merely suggestions. I pulled out my phone. Ryan frowned. "What are you doing?" "Calling the police." The color immediately drained from his face. "What? You entered my house without permission?" "Come on." "No, Ethan, no." For the first time all day, panic appeared in his expression. Real panic, not because he felt guilty, because consequences had finally entered the conversation. "Dad gave me the key. Not his house." Mom said, "Not her house either." Ryan suddenly looked like a child who'd realized his parents couldn't protect him anymore. He immediately called Dad. I could hear shouting through the speaker. Within 20 minutes, my parents arrived, and they were furious. Not at Ryan, at me, of course. Dad stormed through the front door. "What is wrong with you?" I pointed toward the boxes. "What is wrong with you? He needed somewhere to stay." "Then let him stay with you." Mom stepped forward. "You're overreacting." I laughed, actually laughed. Because apparently finding somebody secretly moving into your house was now an overreaction. "He copied my key. We're family." There it was again, the magic phrase, the excuse for everything, the justification for every violation. Family, family, family. I was so tired of hearing it. Dad crossed his arms. "We thought you'd come around. You thought wrong. We were trying to help." "No, you were trying to force a decision." The silence that followed felt heavy. Because deep down they knew I was right. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't concern. This wasn't love. This was control, pure and simple. When guilt failed, they tried pressure. When pressure failed, they tried manipulation. When manipulation failed, they simply ignored my answer and acted anyway. The problem was that they had finally pushed too far, much too far. I looked directly at Ryan. "You have 1 hour." "What? 1 hour to get every single thing out of my house?" Dad immediately exploded. "You can't do that." I turned toward him. "Watch me." For the first time in my entire life, my father looked genuinely shocked. Not angry, not annoyed. Shocked. Because he had just realized something. The obedient son he'd controlled for decades no longer existed. And before the night was over, I was going to make absolutely sure nobody ever entered my house again. But changing the locks would turn out to be the smallest consequence they faced. Because the secret they'd hidden from me for years was about to come into the open. And once it did, the entire family would turn against them. The morning after I threw Ryan out, I changed every lock on the house. Every single one. Front door, back door, garage, windows, even the side gate. I didn't care how paranoid it looked. At that point, paranoia felt healthier than trust. The locksmith arrived at 8 in the morning. By noon, every old key was useless. When he finished, he casually asked, "Bad tenant?" I laughed. "Worse," he nodded. "Family." The fact that he guessed correctly without hesitation was somehow depressing. Apparently, this wasn't uncommon. After he left, I spent the rest of the day installing security cameras. Doorbell camera, driveway camera, backyard camera, garage camera. If somebody stepped onto my property, I wanted proof. No more surprises, no more entitled relatives wandering around like they owned the place. That evening, my phone exploded again. Dad, Mom, Ryan, ignored, Dad, ignored, Mom, ignored. Finally, a text appeared. Dad, "You are humiliating this family." I stared at it, then laughed. Interesting choice of words. Because nobody seemed concerned about humiliating me when they secretly copied my keys. Nobody worried about family reputation when they tried moving Ryan into my house without permission. Apparently, humiliation only mattered when it happened to them. I didn't respond. A few hours later, I received a call from someone I wasn't expecting. My Aunt Linda, Dad's older sister. Unlike most of the family, Aunt Linda had always been reasonable, so I answered. "Ethan, hey, Aunt Linda." Her voice sounded hesitant, almost nervous. "I need to ask you something." "Okay. Have you been helping your parents financially?" I sat upright. "What?" The question came completely out of nowhere. "Why?" Silence. Then, "Because your father told everyone you were." I frowned. "What exactly did he say?" Another pause, then she sighed. "He told the family you've been contributing to a retirement fund for years." I nearly dropped the phone. "What retirement fund?" "That's what I thought." The silence between us felt heavy, because suddenly something wasn't adding up. Not even a little. I had never contributed to any retirement fund, never promised financial support, never discussed anything remotely similar, yet apparently my father had been telling relatives otherwise. "Why?" Aunt Linda continued. "Your grandmother mentioned it at dinner last month." I felt a knot forming in my stomach. "What exactly did she say?" "That your parents weren't worried about retirement because you'd take care of them." I leaned back slowly. The pieces were starting to fit together, and I didn't like the picture they created, not one bit. After hanging up, I started thinking about the past few years. Every strange comment, every weird assumption, every entitled expectation. Then I remembered something. 2 years earlier, my parents had suddenly stopped talking about retirement investments. Before that, it had been a constant topic. Then it vanished overnight. At the time, I hadn't questioned it. Now I was. The next clue arrived unexpectedly, 3 days later, from Grandma. Apparently guilt had finally gotten to her. She called late in the evening. "Ethan." "Hi, Grandma. I need to tell you something." Her voice sounded troubled, the kind of troubled people sound when they've been carrying a secret too long. "What is it?" A long pause followed, then she said, "Your father cashed out most of his retirement savings." I froze. "What?" "Several years ago." The room suddenly felt very quiet. "Why?" Another pause, then came the answer. "Ryan." Of course it was Ryan. Everything always came back to Ryan. "What happened?" Grandma sighed. "The business." The failed business. The one Dad had claimed wasn't a big deal. The one Ryan had supposedly funded himself. The one that collapsed within months. Apparently that wasn't the whole story. Not even close. According to Grandma, Ryan's business failure had been catastrophic. Massive debts. Loans, credit cards, personal guarantees, financial disaster. And when everything fell apart, Dad stepped in, using retirement money, a lot of retirement money, far more than anyone knew, far more than anyone admitted. I sat silently as the truth unfolded. Year after year, Ryan made bad decisions. Year after year, my parents rescued him, until eventually they had sacrificed their own future. And now they expected me to replace what was gone. Suddenly, the house obsession made perfect sense. The retirement plan, the assumptions, the entitlement, the pressure, they weren't planning around me. They were depending on me without my knowledge, without my permission, without ever asking. I wasn't their son anymore. I was their contingency plan, their backup investment, their emergency fund. And they had already spent years counting on money that didn't belong to them. Money I hadn't even earned yet. The realization made me sick. Not because of the money, because of the betrayal. Because while I worked multiple jobs, while I skipped vacations, while I sacrificed everything to build stability, my parents were quietly assuming they'd eventually benefit from it, not earn it, benefit from it. And the worst part, the lies weren't finished. Because 2 days later, I discovered something even worse. Something that would finally destroy the image my father had spent years protecting. And when the truth came out, the entire family would learn exactly where all that retirement money had really gone. The truth came from the last person I expected, Ryan's ex-girlfriend. Her name was Melissa. We'd never been particularly close, but we'd always gotten along. She was smart, responsible, patient, which explained why she eventually got tired of dating Ryan. I hadn't spoken to her in years, so when her name appeared on my phone, I was surprised. When she asked if we could meet, I became concerned. And when she told me she had information about my parents and Ryan, I knew this wasn't going to be good. We met at a small coffee shop near my office. Melissa looked nervous. The kind of nervous people get when they're about to reveal something ugly. After a few minutes of small talk, she got straight to the point. "Do you know how much money your parents gave Ryan?" I laughed. "Apparently a lot." Her expression didn't change. "Ethan." The seriousness in her voice made my stomach tight. "How much?" She looked down, then back up. "Close to $300,000. I genuinely thought I misheard her. "What, over several years?" I stared. 300,000, not 30,000, not 50,000, 300,000. The number was so ridiculous that my brain initially rejected it. That's impossible. Melissa shook her head. No. Then she began listing things: business debt, credit card debt, car loans, personal loans, legal fees, missed payments, collections, failed investments. Each one paid for by my parents, each one hidden from the family, each one quietly buried before anyone could ask questions. By the time she finished speaking, I felt physically sick. Not because of the money itself, because of what it represented. Years of lies, years of manipulation. Years of pretending everything was fine while secretly pouring money into Ryan's disasters. And according to Melissa, there was one final secret. The biggest one. A secret Ryan had desperately tried to hide. His business hadn't failed naturally. It hadn't collapsed because of bad luck. It collapsed because Ryan stole money from his own investors. Not enough for criminal charges, but enough to trigger lawsuits and settlements. Enough to create debts that nearly destroyed him. Enough to wipe out my parents' retirement savings when they stepped in to save him. I sat there in complete silence. Everything suddenly made sense. The missing retirement fund. The obsession with my house. The pressure. The expectations. The assumption that I'd eventually take care of everyone. They weren't planning for retirement. They were trying to recover from Ryan, and they expected me to fill the hole. Melissa handed me copies of several documents. Emails, settlement agreements, loan records, financial statements, proof, real proof, not rumors, not speculation, proof. I left that meeting feeling something I hadn't felt before. Not anger, clarity. For years I'd wondered why my family treated me differently. Why Ryan always got protected. Why every responsibility somehow landed on my shoulders. Now I understood. Because they couldn't rely on Ryan. So they built their future around me instead. The next opportunity came sooner than expected. A week later, Grandma hosted a family dinner. Almost everyone attended. Parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, Ryan, the entire family. Normally, I would have skipped it. This time I went because I was tired of secrets and because I was done being the villain in a story built on lies. Dinner started normally enough. Then Dad made a mistake, a very big mistake. Halfway through the meal, he decided to take a shot at me. Some people forget where they came from once they get a little success. The table went quiet. Everyone knew who he meant. I set my fork down, slowly, carefully. Then I looked directly at him. Do you want to talk about success? Dad smiled, the confident smile of someone who thought he controlled the room. Sure, I nodded. Let's talk about where your retirement fund went. The smile disappeared instantly. Completely, around the table, several relatives exchanged confused looks. Dad's face turned pale. Mom looked terrified, and Ryan suddenly became very interested in his plate. Interesting, I continued. Or we can talk about the business. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The silence felt enormous. What business? One cousin asked. I looked at Ryan, then at Dad, then back at the family. The one that cost nearly $300,000. The room exploded. Questions came from every direction. What? 300,000? That's impossible. Is that true? Dad immediately stood. Ethan, that one word carried a warning. The same warning he'd used my entire life. The same warning that used to make me back down, not anymore. I calmly pulled the documents from my folder, then placed them on the table. One by one. The room fell silent again. People started reading. Faces changed. Confusion became disbelief. Disbelief became shock. Shock became anger, because suddenly everyone understood. The reason my parents needed help. The reason they obsessed over my house. The reason they kept defending Ryan. The reason they kept attacking me. And for the first time in years, nobody was looking at me like I was the problem. They were looking at my father, at my mother, at Ryan. And the fallout was only beginning. Because before the night ended, my father would make one final desperate demand. And that demand would cost him almost everything. For several minutes after the documents hit the table, nobody spoke. The silence was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not awkward, not uncomfortable, devastating, because the illusion was gone. The carefully crafted story my parents had spent years maintaining had just collapsed in front of everyone. No more excuses, no more half-truths, no more blaming me. The numbers didn't lie. $300,000, gone, burned through trying to save Ryan from consequences he never should have escaped. My father stood frozen at the head of the table. My mother looked like she might cry. Ryan looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Good. For once, they were experiencing a fraction of the discomfort they'd spent years dumping onto everyone else. Then Dad finally snapped. He slammed his hand onto the table. "This isn't the whole story." Nobody answered, not because they agreed, because they were waiting to hear how he planned to explain away $300,000. Dad pointed directly at me. "You're making us look like criminals." I laughed. The sound echoed through the room. "You did that yourselves." His face reddened instantly. "We sacrificed everything for this family." Aunt Linda immediately cut in. "No, Frank, you sacrificed everything for Ryan." The room went silent again. Dad looked genuinely shocked, like he'd never imagined someone would say it out loud. But now that the truth was visible, nobody could unsee it. One cousin spoke next. 300,000? Another shook his head. "That's insane." An uncle added, "You spent retirement money?" Every question hit like a hammer. Every answer made things worse, because there was no justification, no explanation, no version of events where this looked reasonable. Then Dad made the biggest mistake of the night. He turned toward me and revealed exactly why he'd been so obsessed with my house. Ethan was always supposed to help. The entire room froze, including me. Dad realized too late what he just admitted, but there was no taking it back. "What does that mean?" Grandma asked. Dad hesitated, then doubled down. "I mean he's successful." Nobody spoke. "He has a good career." Still silence. "He has a house." The realization slowly spread around the table. Faces changed, expressions hardened, because everyone finally understood. This wasn't about helping family. This wasn't about supporting each other. This wasn't about love. Dad had spent years expecting me to become Plan B, the replacement retirement fund, the backup savings account, the solution to problems I didn't create. And somehow he thought that was normal. Then came the demand, the one that ended everything. Dad looked directly at me, in front of the entire family, and said, "You owe us." The room went completely silent. I stared at him, not angry, not shocked, just amazed, after everything, after the lies, after the manipulation, after the key copies, after the attempted move-in. After discovering they had planned my future without my knowledge, he still believed I owed him. "You owe us for raising you." There it was, the final card, the ultimate weapon. The argument toxic parents pull when every other excuse fails. The bill for childhood. As if feeding your children creates a lifelong debt. As if basic parenting is an investment expecting returns. As if love should come with interest payments. I slowly stood. Every eye in the room turned toward me, and for the first time in my life I didn't hesitate. "You know what's funny?" Dad frowned. I continued. "You've spent years telling everyone how responsible I am." Nobody moved. "Years bragging about my career." Silence. "Years talking about my success." I looked directly at Ryan, then back at Dad. "And somehow none of that belongs to me." Nobody interrupted, because they already knew where this was going. "You don't see me as your son." Dad's expression shifted. "You see me as an investment." Mom immediately started crying. But I wasn't finished. "You spent years betting everything on Ryan." I pointed toward the documents. "That was your choice." Then I pointed at myself. "This is mine. The house, the career, the savings, the future, mine, not theirs, mine." Dad opened his mouth, probably preparing another guilt trip, another lecture, another demand. I never let him finish. "You are not moving into my house." The words landed like concrete. "You are not getting financial support." His face went pale. "You are not getting ownership." Paler. "And you are never getting another key." Complete silence. Then I delivered the sentence I'd wanted to say for years. "The consequences of your choices belong to you." Nobody spoke. Nobody argued. Nobody defended them, because there was nothing left to defend. For the first time in decades, reality had entered the room, and reality wasn't on their side. I grabbed my jacket, picked up my folder, then walked toward the door. Behind me, chaos was beginning. Questions, arguments, accusations, family members demanding explanations. Ryan trying to disappear, Mom crying, Dad shouting. The entire structure they'd built was collapsing, and for the first time in my life, I didn't stay to help hold it up. I simply walked away. And that wasn't even the best part, because 6 months later, karma arrived. And it hit harder than anyone could have imagined. People always imagine karma as something dramatic, a single moment, a perfect act of revenge, a cinematic ending where everyone gets exactly what they deserve. Reality is usually different. Karma doesn't always arrive all at once. Sometimes it arrives slowly, one consequence at a time, and that's exactly what happened to my family. 6 months after that dinner, everything finally caught up with them. The first domino was Ryan. For years, he'd survived because somebody else absorbed the consequences. Mom, Dad, me. Whenever disaster appeared, a safety net magically materialized underneath him. But after the dinner, That safety net disappeared. Completely. Family members stopped lending money. Relatives stopped believing excuses. The sympathy dried up almost overnight. People had finally seen the pattern, and once they saw it, they couldn't unsee it. Ryan bounced between temporary jobs, lost several of them, missed payments, accumulated more debt, and for the first time in his life, nobody rushed in to save him. Not because they suddenly hated him, because they were exhausted. Years of enabling had finally reached their breaking point. Then came my parents. The reality of their finances had become impossible to hide. Retirement savings were gone. Investments were gone. Emergency funds were gone. Everything they'd quietly sacrificed trying to rescue Ryan had vanished. The house they lived in suddenly became a problem. A very expensive problem. Maintenance costs, property taxes, mortgage payments, insurance. All the things they'd ignored while assuming I would eventually solve everything. Now there was no backup plan, no future move into my house, no financial rescue waiting in the wings, just reality. And reality came with bills. 3 months after the family dinner, they put their house on the market. I found out through Aunt Linda. Apparently the decision caused another massive argument. Dad wanted to keep the house. Mom wanted to keep the house. But wanting something and affording something are very different things. Eventually reality won. The house sold. For less than they hoped. Far less. And suddenly the family home I'd grown up in was gone. When I heard the news, I expected to feel sad. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Because that house wasn't being lost because of me. It wasn't being lost because I refused to help. It was being lost because of years of choices. Years of decisions, years of enabling, years of pretending consequences were optional. The second major domino fell shortly afterward. Ryan got sued again. Nothing criminal, nothing dramatic, just another financial mess. Another agreement he couldn't honor. Another promise he couldn't keep. Only this time nobody stepped in. Dad couldn't, Mom couldn't, and I certainly wasn't going to. For once Ryan had to handle Ryan, the outcome wasn't pretty. But it was necessary. Because for the first time in his life, he was finally experiencing the consequences he'd spent decades avoiding. Meanwhile, my life became surprisingly peaceful. No guilt trips, no emergency phone calls. No demands, no expectations, just silence, glorious silence. I finished furnishing my house, started gardening, hosted friends, took vacations, built savings, actually enjoyed the life I'd worked so hard to create. One evening about 6 months after everything exploded, I was sitting on my back patio watching the sunset when my phone rang. Mom, the first call in nearly 2 months. I considered ignoring it. Then curiosity won. I answered. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed, not dramatically, not manipulatively, just tired, very tired. Ethan. Hi, Mom. Another silence. Then she said something I never expected to hear. You were right. I leaned back in my chair. She continued. We spent years protecting Ryan. The words sounded painful, like she was forcing herself to acknowledge something she'd spent decades denying. And we expected too much from you. I didn't know what to say because, honestly, I hadn't expected accountability, not from her. Maybe not from anyone. Then she said one more thing, something that surprised me even more. You shouldn't have had to carry all of that. For the first time in years, I heard genuine regret. Not an excuse, not a justification, regret. We talked for nearly 30 minutes. Not about money, not about houses. Not about obligations, just life. The conversation didn't magically fix everything. Years of damage don't disappear overnight, but it was a start. Dad never apologized, at least not directly. That wasn't really his style. But according to relatives, he stopped talking about my house. Stopped talking about entitlement. Stopped talking about what I owed him. For a man like him, that was probably the closest thing to an apology that existed. And honestly, that was enough, because I didn't need revenge. I didn't need humiliation. I didn't need them to suffer. I just needed freedom. Freedom from expectations I never agreed to. Freedom from responsibilities that weren't mine. Freedom from being treated like a backup retirement plan instead of a son. And in the end, that's exactly what I got. The house remained mine. The future remained mine. The choices remained mine. For the first time in my life, nobody else was writing my story. And that's the thing my family never understood. The most valuable thing I bought wasn't the house. It was independence. And unlike money, unlike property, unlike retirement funds, nobody was ever getting a copy of that key again.